Exactly, on ground troops is about 10,000 Americans with a coalition of other Arab countries, hopefully maybe NATO countries, maybe even France, where we could go in on the ground with sufficient air support to take out ISIS. They are not invincible. They are not unbeatable. But as long as they have this base and this ability, unlike Al-Qaeda, then they're going to be able to orchestrate threats to the United States of America. The second thing we need to do is a robust arming, training, and equipping. The only way you can do that is having a no-fly zone, a buffer zone, where also you could relieve the pressure from the refugee problem so that they would not be barrel-bombed by Bashar al-Assad, the great butcher in the history of the Middle East.
And French President François Hollande declared war, basically. He said that France was at war on that same Friday evening. It does sound a little bit too much almost like a war on terror, though, doesn't it? This is a war on a group that calls itself Islamic State, isn't really a state, though, doesn't have a clear geographic anchoring. Doesn't it sound a little bit too much like a war that the United States has been waging and that clearly isn't ending at all?
I understand President Hollande and the French people's reaction to this. It is a form of warfare, but it's a different kind of warfare. But I think when you kill citizens of a country and commit acts of terror, then you can only describe it as war. But you've got to describe it as the kind of war that it is. And by the way, I have great respect for President Hollande, but I firmly disagree with an alliance with the Russians. The Russians are supporting Bashar al-Assad, who has barrel-bombed and slaughtered 250,000 of his own people. Why do we have this refugee problem? Why were one of these terrorists that attacked Paris that came through Greece as a, quote, refugee? It's because of a failed policy which has allowed this situation in Syria to deteriorate to the point where people just have to leave. And so Vladimir Putin's ambitions are very different from ours. He wants to keep Bashar al-Assad or his stooge in power. He wants to maintain a major role in the Middle East and his port. That is not the ambition of the United States of America, nor should it be the ambition of France.
But doesn't it look like inevitably that on the diplomatic front, these countries somehow have to get together? François Hollande is coming over to Washington on Tuesday of next week. Only 2 days after that, he will be in Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin of Russia. Clearly, he wants to build something that he calls a grand coalition, and that would include Vladimir Putin. Are you sure that is not one potential way out of this, for everybody to somehow forcibly get along on the diplomatic front?
Does this ignore the dismemberment of Ukraine? Does this ignore the pressures that are being put on the Baltic countries? Does this ignore all of the policies and actions on the part of Vladimir Putin that are in direct contradiction to everything we stand for and believe in? Are we just going to now say, yeah, go ahead in Ukraine? And by the way, probably next spring he will be making additional moves in Ukraine. Is that where there's a certain moral standard to watch a country being dismembered, and then in another part of the world, just because of expediency, you are now going to cooperate with them and allow them to carry out their ambitions, which are dramatically different from ours. Ours is the removal of Bashar al-Assad. His is to keep Bashar al-Assad or his stooge in power. ISIS has killed a lot of people. Bashar al-Assad has killed 250,000 of them. He's the one that drove the refugees. So, and who's backing Bashar al-Assad? Vladimir Putin.
So without him at the table,